Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission here is always to cut through the noise, stack up the sources, and give you the essential knowledge fast, but, thoroughly.
Exactly.
Today, we're not just studying history, we are peeling back the layers on one of the 20th century's most enduring cultural icons, Amelia Earhart.
And it's really an investigation into control, celebrity, and compromise. The legend of Amelia Earhart, Lady Lindy. It often eclipses the intensely pragmatic, the technically focused, and sometimes, well, surprisingly flawed pioneer she actually was.
Yeah.
We are tracing her incredible, very condensed life. Born in 1897, vanished on July 2nd, 1937, and then declared legally dead January 5, 1939.
Her timeline is it's a compressed burst of achievement. And what immediately stands out, the thing that cements her place in history, is the list of defining records she set.
Oh, absolutely.
Most notably, in 1932, she became the first woman to fly solo nonstop across the Atlantic Ocean.
And that was just the headline.
Right. She spent her life continuously setting new aviation benchmarks, constantly pushing against the perceived limits of the time.
And what's fascinating to me is the duality of her career. Her work wasn't just contained to the cockpit.
Not at all.
She was a celebrity who actively, and you could even say ruthlessly, leveraged her fame. She promoted the then-nascent commercial air travel industry and turned her own exploits into best-selling books.
Like 20 Acres, 40 Men and the fun of it.
Exactly. She made aviation accessible to a massive public audience, and on top of that, she founded the 99s, the foundational organization for female pilots.
So she had this deep commitment to advocacy right alongside her own personal ambition.
It's a powerful combination.
So we have the technical pioneer on one hand, the savvy public figure on the other, both operating at, peak capacity. But as you said, everything always comes back to the central mystery. The 1937 world circumnavigation attempt in the Lockheed Model 10E Electra, with her navigator, Fred Noonan, they simply disappeared near that tiny, difficult-to-find spot on the map called Howland Island.
The vastness of the Pacific.
Yeah.
It really is the third character in this story. The historically favored official conclusion, which is supported by naval analysis, is that the Electra ran out of fuel before ever reaching that tiny sliver of land.
It crashed into the ocean.
And crashed into, an estimated 17 to 18,000 foot depth. That is the probability. But the fact that the wreckage remains missing, that's precisely what has allowed the mythology and all the speculation to flourish for nearly a century.
Right. So our goal for you, the learner, is to provide a comprehensive, quick understanding of her remarkable career, but with a specific lens. We want to look at how a woman who constantly demanded control over her life ultimately ended her mission in a catastrophic loss of it. We're going to culminate in a detailed look at the confusing, frustrating circumstances of that final critical flight, because you have to understand the drive before you can really analyze the disappearance.
You really do. To understand the fearless aviator, you have to look at the unconventional Kansas girl. Amelia was born in Atchison in 1897 in the home of her maternal grandfather, who was a former federal judge.
Which sounds very respectable and buttoned up.
It does. But her upbringing was anything but standard for the turn of the century.
Right. Her mother, Amy Earhart, she famously rejected the Victorian ideal of raising nice little girls.
Totally. So Amelia, who was nicknamed Mealy, and her sister, Grace Muriel, or Pidge, they were actively pushed toward adventure. They were climbing trees, they were hunting rats with a rifle.
And wearing bloomers.
And wearing bloomers instead of traditional restrictive dresses, openly defying, strong neighborhood disapproval.
That early comfort with being seen as an outsider, I think that's a really key point.
It is. And that desire for nonconformity, it led to her first, let's call it an experiment, in engineering and speed back in 1904.
The famous first flight at age 7. I love this story. She didn't just play on a swing set, she took her vision of a roller coaster, something she'd seen in St. Louis, and actually constructed a homemade ramp.
Securing it to the roof of the family tool shed, no less.
Exactly. And the resulting crash was dramatic, a bruised lip, torn clothes, but her immediate reaction was just pure, undiluted exhilaration. She told her sister, "Oh, Pidge, it's just like flying."
It's a profound moment. The joy of the speed and the thrill of the risk completely outweighed the pain, and this was long before an engine was ever involved.
But interestingly, when she saw a real airplane for the first time, 4 years later, there was no epiphany.
Not at all. At the Iowa State Fair in 1908, she described the biplane as a rickety flivver. Her words were, "a thing of rusty wire and wood and not at all interesting."
And she asked to go back to the merry-go-round.
She did. So the romance of aviation wasn't immediate for her. The challenge of it was.
But that carefree, unconventional childhood was. It was cut short pretty abruptly by family instability.
Yes. Around 1914, the family experienced a really severe financial decline. Her father, Edwin, he struggled increasingly with alcoholism and lost his job.
So they were forced to move constantly.
Frequently. It led to a period of instability that Amelia herself identified as the definitive end of her childhood. She just had to grow up fast.
And that need for some kind of stability is what led her to become a nurse's aide during the Great War.
It was. She began working for the Red Cross in Toronto in 1917. And there she was hearing stories from wounded military pilots that started sparking a genuine sort of theoretical interest in flight.
But this period was also physically devastating for her.
Completely. During the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, she contracted pneumonia and this just debilitating maxillary sinusitis. It led to nearly a year of hospitalization and a very long convalescence.
And this wasn't just a tough year for her. That chronic sinusitis became a lifelong battle, didn't it?
It was a serious chronic handicap. I mean, you have to remember, this is the pre-antibiotic era. She endured painful, minor operations to try and clear the affected sinus cavities, and most of them were unsuccessful.
So imagine this. You're a globally recognized, record-setting flyer, and you're constantly battling a physical condition that sometimes required you to wear a bandage on your cheek just to cover a small drainage tube.
It speaks volumes about her physical and mental endurance, that she achieved what she did despite that constant physical challenge.
The shift from that sort of theoretical interest to a real, concrete passion came in 1920 and almost by accident.
Almost like a dare. She attended an airfair in Toronto, and a World War I ace deliberately dove his plane close to the observation deck.
And while her friend probably flinched.
She stood her ground. She later claimed she sensed the red airplane said something to her. The psychological challenge, that assertion of bravery, it seemed to appeal to her more than the machine itself at that point.
But the real physical turning point, the moment the hook was well and truly set, came later that year in Long Beach, California.
Right. She and her father went to an aerial meet on December 28. She managed to scrape together $10, which, in today's buying power, is about $160, for a 10-minute passenger flight with a pilot named Frank Hawks.
It was a short, expensive ride, but it was transformative.
Completely. She recalled, by the time I had got 200 or 300 feet off the ground, I knew I had to fly. The sheer physics of lift and speed just captivated her.
And from that exact moment, she was absolutely determined to fund her own way into the sky.
She took on a whole bunch of jobs. Driving a truck, working as a stenographer, even photography. She managed to save $1,000, which is equivalent to roughly $18,000 today, and that was enough to buy her 12 hours of instruction in January 1921.
And her instructor was Netta Snook, a pioneer herself.
One of the first female instructors in the entire country.
And the detail about her first plane and her coat, that tells you everything you need to know about her commitment to controlling her image, even way back then.
Oh, absolutely. She purchased a second-hand chromium yellow Kinner Airster biplane, which she nicknamed the Canary. But she recognized that a new pilot with brand new gear would be, ridiculed by the veteran mechanics and flyers. So she aged her gear. She bought a new leather flying coat, and to immediately give it that character and authenticity, she deliberately aged it by sleeping in it for several nights and staining it with aircraft oil. She was creating her image as an authentic, seasoned aviator right out of the gate.
And that determination paid off almost immediately in terms of setting records.
It did. By 1922, she was using that Airster to set a world altitude record for female pilots, reaching an impressive 14,000 feet. The following year, 1923, she earned her pilot's license, number 60 is 17.
Making her only the 16th woman in the United States to hold that distinction.
She was quickly establishing herself as technically proficient and incredibly bold.
But her flying career then hit a wall because of financial problems, which forced her to pivot back towards stability again.
The stability she craved was just constantly undermined by circumstance. Her grandmother's inheritance, which had helped fund her early flights, was lost due to a disastrous investment in a gypsum mine.
So she had to sell her planes.
She had to sell both the Canary and a second plane she'd acquired. She moved to Boston, found stability as a teacher and social worker at Denison House in 1925. She continued to promote flying locally, but it was this quiet, steady job that positioned her perfectly for the monumental call that came in 1928.
So we've established this driven, self-funded, slightly unconventional pilot working quietly in Boston. Then 1927 happens, Lindbergh flies the Atlantic, and the race is on. This is where fame finds Earhart, but it's entirely on someone else's terms.
That's the key distinction. Lindbergh set the standard, and this American heiress, Amy Phipps Guest, wanted to be the first woman to repeat the feat. She bought a Fokker FVII trimotor, christened it the Friendship.
But her family stepped in.
Dramatically. Her sons reportedly threatened to quit Yale and Cambridge if she went through the dangerous flight.
So Guest pulled out, but she kept the project alive. She just decided to sponsor it instead.
Precisely. She tasked her sponsors with finding the right sort of girl. A pilot who was well-educated, well-mannered, attractive, and most importantly, American.
She was looking for a figurehead.
Yes, not necessarily the world's best pilot, a figurehead.
And the man who orchestrated this search was George P. Putnam, her future publisher, publicist, and, of course, husband.
Putnam had just successfully managed the publication of Lindbergh's book, We Air Ye, and he recognized the massive commercial value of a female counterpart. A contact pointed him to Amelia Earhart at Dennison House.
When he met her, what was her reaction to the job offer? I mean, she had to know she wasn't going to be the star pilot in that arrangement.
She was initially skeptical, seeing the offer for exactly what it was, a chance to be a glorified passenger. But her primary non-negotiable condition is so critical to understanding her character.
What was it?
She refused to be just baggage. She demanded time at the controls.
That detail is a crucial precursor to the larger theme of her life, isn't it? She insisted on contractual authority from the very beginning.
Yes. Her contract stipulated she would be the commander aboard the Friendship. It gave her final authority over policy and personnel, even over the veteran pilots, Wilmer Stoltz and Louis Gordon.
So she secured the title of authority, even if the flight experience was beyond her technical capacity at that moment.
Exactly.
Now, let's get into the crossing itself. In June 1928, it was a chaotic start.
Absolutely chaotic. The Friendship was so heavy they had to remove 30 gallons of fuel just to get off the ground in East Boston. They eventually reached Trapezy, Newfoundland, where they were trapped for almost 2 weeks by gales, fog, and mechanical delays.
It's a miserable wait.
And they finally seized this chaotic opportunity to depart on June 17, knowing they were beating a rival, Mabel Bowles' crew, to the punch. And they did this despite their pilot, Stoltz, nursing a pretty serious hangover.
Wow. And the flight itself was a stark contrast to her contractual commander role.
It was 20 hours and 40 minutes of grueling conditions. They hit dense fog, thick cloud cover, which required Stoltz to transition entirely to instrument flying.
Which Earhart had no experience with.
Right. She lacked experience with non-visual or blind flying, so she was unable to take the controls. Her role was reduced to keeping the flight log and providing basic navigation checks. And to make matters worse, the radio failed early on, so they couldn't communicate with the ground at all.
And where they landed in Wales wasn't exactly Paris, was it?
No, not even close. They were forced down in the Bury Estuary in Carmarthenshire, Wales, because they were critically low on fuel and dealing with mist. They were aiming for Southampton.
I read that Stoltz went ashore, but Earhart stayed with the plane.
She did. She and Gordon stayed with the plane until it was successfully towed into Buryport Harbor, and only then did they consider the journey complete. It was a point of principle for her.
And despite Stoltz doing all the actual flying, it was Earhart who became the media darling.
Instantly. She was magnetic. She attracted the vast majority of the global press attention, and her modest assessment. Bill did all the flying, had to. I was baggage like a sack of potatoes. Maybe someone else tried alone. That only amplified her appeal.
She perfectly embodied that American spirit of quiet ambition.
She did. And Putnam was waiting to capitalize on that image. The PR machine just went into overdrive, immediately labeling her Lady Lindy.
It was a masterclass in celebrity management, really.
Oh, yeah. She received a massive ticker tape parade in New York, a reception at the White House with President Coolidge. Putnam leveraged her fame into successful lecture tours, immediately published her book, 20 H's 40 Minute, and secured these lucrative product endorsements.
Luggage, most famously.
Luggage, which was an obvious connection for a frequent traveler.
But the commercial aspects, they led to the famous controversy over the Lucky Strike cigarettes endorsement.
And that's where we see the line between funding your flying and your public image blurring dangerously. She accepted the Lucky Strike deal, and though she reportedly channeled the money to support Richard Evelyn Byrd's South Pole expedition.
It didn't matter to some people.
No. The endorsement still caused McCall's magazine to immediately retract their offer for her to be their aviation editor. For Putnam, it was about cash flow and visibility. For her, it was this constant calculation of risk. How much of her clean, pioneering image was she willing to trade for financing the next great challenge?
It really sets the stage for the next phase of her life, using that hard-won celebrity as a tool, not just an end in itself.
Earhart recognized that being famous gave her influence far beyond the speed she could achieve in her planes. She immediately transitioned her public image into a powerful, strategic platform to push aviation and, critically, women's causes.
She jumped right into these high-profile editorial and corporate roles.
It's exactly. From 1928 to 1930, she was an associate editor at Cosmopolitan magazine, relentlessly campaigning for public acceptance of aviation and advocating for female participation in the field.
And at the same time, she was a vice president at National Airways.
Right, which later became Northeast Airlines. She was operating in the air, in the press, and in corporate America all at once. It was incredible.
Her most lasting organizational achievement, however, was born out of a bit of frustration.
The founding of the 99s in 1929, after the Women's Air Derby, which was a race, the columnist Will Rogers, cruelly nicknamed the Powder Puff Derby, Earhart brought together the female pilots.
And the name came from the number of charter members.
That's right. She became its first president in 1930 and used the organization to fight for institutional change. She eventually helped persuade the Fédération Aéronautique Internationale, the FAI, to establish accepted international standards specifically for women's records.
And she didn't just advocate. She demonstrated her principles through action, like refusing to participate in the Bendix Trophy race opening.
That 1934 incident is a perfect example of her moral authority. When women were banned from competing in the Bendix Trophy race, she flat-out refused to transport screen actor Mary Pickford to the event. She wouldn't lend her celebrity image to a discriminatory system.
While her advocacy was growing, so was her skill. She was setting non-Atlantic records, really showcasing her growing technical mastery.
She was transitioning from a celebrity flyer to a genuinely accomplished aviator. In August 1928, she became the first woman to fly solo across North America and back.
And then she demonstrated her versatility.
She did. In 1931, she set a world altitude record of 18,415 feet and a Pitcairn PCA-2 autogyro. That's a unique aircraft that combined helicopter and airplane technology.
And even when she competed in the 1935 Bendix Trophy race, she finished fifth, which was a very respectable placement.
Very, especially when you consider her stock. Lockheed Vega was simply outclassed by other custom-built 300-plus mile-per-hour racing machines.
But all these records, they were really just prologue for the ultimate personal goal, proving that the 1928 flight was just the beginning.
The solo transatlantic triumph in 1932. 5 years after Lindbergh, she took off from Harbor Grace, Newfoundland, aiming for Paris in her Lockheed Vega 5B.
And it was a near disaster.
A total nail-biter. 14 hours and 56 minutes battling strong headwinds, severe ice buildup on the wings, and persistent mechanical problems that almost forced her into the sea.
And instead of Paris, she landed in a pasture in Northern Ireland. The famous quote from that moment, it just captures the essence of her understated heroism.
A farmhand came up and asked if she had flown far, and her simple, iconic reply was, "From America."
The understated delivery just masked this immense achievement.
And the recognition that followed was massive. She received the Distinguished Flying Cross from Congress, the French Cross of Knight of the Legion of Honor, and President Hoover presented her with the Gold Medal of the National Geographic Society.
Now, let's circle back to her personal philosophy of control, specifically the partnership marriage she entered into with George P. Putnam in 1931.
It was truly revolutionary for the era, especially for such a high-profile couple. Putnam proposed 6 times before she finally accepted.
6 times.
And she insisted on defining the marriage as a partnership with dual control. A perfect analogy from aviation. But the truly insightful part, the moment she really defined her autonomy, was the letter she hand-delivered to him on their wedding day.
This letter is so often studied because it laid out these non-negotiable terms for her absolute independence.
It's incredible. She explicitly stated she would not hold him to, and I'm quoting here, any medieval sick code of faithfulness, and she reserved the same freedom for herself.
Wow.
She demanded a place to be by myself now and then, for I cannot guarantee to endure at all times the confinement of even an attractive cage.
She retained her maiden name, too. She refused the title Mrs. Putnam.
And he was often referred to as Mr. Earhart. It's the ultimate statement of boundary setting. Yeah. Her career and her personal freedom were primary.
So if she was that relentless in maintaining dual control in her most intimate partnership, Why do we see these potential compromises starting to creep into her professional decisions as the final flight approaches? That tension is really what drives this investigation.
That tension is everything. I mean, she continued setting records, including the challenging Pacific route. In January 1935, she became the first aviator to fly solo from Honolulu to Oakland, California.
A notoriously dangerous route that had claimed lives.
It had. But by this point, she had such mastery that she was so relaxed in the final hours that she was listening to the broadcast of the Metropolitan Opera from New York. She had achieved true relaxed mastery of long-distance oceanic flight.
And this mastery, it led to her final, most ambitious project, which she funded partly through her association with Purdue University.
Right. She joined Purdue in 1935 as a visiting faculty member, advising young women on careers, and serving as a technical advisor for the aeronautics department. She realized her reliable Vega was just. It was inadequate for the longest oceanic flight she envisioned.
A circumnavigation of the globe as close to the equator as possible.
Exactly. She needed a true flying laboratory.
The circumnavigation was designed to be the ultimate statement. 29,000 miles, following a roughly equatorial route. It was the hardest route possible, and it required major financial backing.
Which Purdue stepped up to provide. They established the Amelia Earhart Fund, raising $50,000, that's equivalent to over $1.1 million today, specifically to purchase the state-of-the-art Lockheed Electra 10E twin-engine monoplane.
The plane she called her flying laboratory.
Appropriately, but it required significant modifications for oceanic work.
So what were the key modifications? What did they have to do to turn a luxury passenger plane into a deep ocean endurance craft?
The Electra was fundamentally altered. Most significantly, to cover those vast distances, the interior was gutted and fitted with huge auxiliary fuel tanks. This meant the plane was dark, cramped, and weighed down significantly, but it gave it the necessary range. The Electra 10E was a complex, cutting-edge piece of machinery for 1937.
And she didn't plan to navigate alone for this high-stakes flight. She brought in specialists.
Initially, she chose Harry Manning. He was a highly skilled ship captain and radio operator who knew Morse code and was an experienced pilot.
But management worries started to creep in.
They did. Manning made a small navigational error on a test flight. He was off by about 20 miles, which was well within the accepted 30-mile error tolerance for the time, but it clearly spooked George Putnam.
And this is where the legendary Fred Noonan came in.
Noonan was the absolute gold standard. He was a licensed ship's captain who had recently established many of Pan American World Airways' famous China Clipper routes across the Pacific. His specialty was celestial navigation, calculating a precise position based on the sun, moon, and stars.
The critical skill needed for traversing the featureless Pacific expanse.
Absolutely essential.
They launched their first attempt in March 1937, planning to fly west to east, but it ended abruptly in Hawaii.
That first attempt, with a full crew, including Manning and a technical advisor named Paul Mance, it made it successfully to Luke Field, Pearl Harbor. But on the takeoff run for the Howland Island leg, disaster struck.
What happened?
The plane suffered an uncontrolled ground loop, which is essentially spinning violently on the runway. The landing gear collapsed, the propellers struck the ground, and the Electra was severely damaged.
And the cause of that crash is disputed, right? Was it pilot error or mechanical failure?
It remains a point of historical contention, and I think it reflects the pressure she was under. Witnesses claimed a tire blew, and Earhart herself suspected a failure in the right tire or landing gear.
But others, including Mance, cited pilot error.
They did. And given her high level of skill and her history of insisting on the best equipment, it raises an important question. Why did Putnam, her manager, seem so keen to accept the pilot error narrative and ship the plane back to Burbank for extensive, expensive repairs? The pressure to quickly get the attempt going again was just immense.
So when she launched the second successful attempt in June 1937, what were the key changes?
Two critical changes. First, the direction was reversed to east to west. This wasn't arbitrary, it was necessitated by the changing seasons. The earlier March route was favorable, but by June, the seasonal shift in trade winds and monsoons made the west to east path virtually impossible due to severe headwinds.
And the second change?
Harry Manning, the skilled radio operator, left the crew. This left only Earhart and Noonan.
And this is where that theme of compromise becomes potentially fatal.
This is the crux of the tragedy. George P. Putnam, who was always balancing cost, weight, and the urgency of publicity, he pressed Earhart to remove essential safety and navigational equipment to lighten the aircraft.
Which is just shocking given her prior insistence on dual control and authority.
It is. Accepting this compromise, sacrificing safety margins for weight, is the single most frustrating decision of her career. She took off without the most experienced radio operator, relying on a system she didn't fully master, and without necessary reserve equipment.
But despite those compromises, they made incredible time across two-thirds of the globe.
They absolutely did. They departed Miami on June 1st, flew through South America, across Africa and Asia, arriving at Lae, New Guinea on June 29. They'd covered 22,000 miles. But the final 7,000 miles across the Pacific, targeting that tiny remote island, that was always the most challenging leg.
So we arrive at the final flight, Lae to Howland Island. They took off on July 10th, 1937, for a 2,556-mile overwater journey. And the destination, Howland Island, is notoriously tiny. It's just 6,500 feet long, 1,600 feet wide, and barely 10 feet above the ocean.
Missing it meant certain death.
The plan hinged entirely on ground support. The U.S. Coast Guard cutter Itasca was stationed near Howland Island to act as a crucial navigational aid.
Right. They were equipped to provide radio contact, a homing signal, a basic radio direction finding system, and they were even tasked with burning oil to create a smoke column that might be visible over the horizon.
And what's truly tragic is that every single one of those support methods failed at the critical moment.
It was a cascade of catastrophic failures. If we trace the final radio timeline as they approached Howland, the Itasca received strong, clear voice transmissions from Earhart, using her call sign KHAQQ.
But she couldn't hear them back.
Exactly. She could not hear the voice transmissions coming back from the ship. It was agonizingly one-way.
She was communicating clearly, but was flying completely blind to their responses.
At 6:14 a.m. Howland time, she was estimated to be within 200 miles and requested a bearing. She even whistled into the microphone, attempting to give the Itasca a continuous signal they could use to triangulate her position.
But the ship's technology failed them.
It did. The Itasca's radio operators were sitting on the solution, but couldn't use it to help her.
Why not?
That's the agony. The Itasca's RDF system, their direction-finding equipment, it could not tune into the aircraft's critical frequency of 305 kilohertz. The radio man, Leo Bellarts, later expressed the profound helplessness of the moment. He said he was sitting there sweating blood because I couldn't do a darn thing about it.
They had her signal, but they couldn't calculate her bearing.
Exactly. And by 7:58 a.m., Earhart reported that her signal was the loudest possible to the Itasca, which means she was right on top of them, or extremely close, but still completely lost.
So the ship desperately sent out Morse code, hoping the clarity of the signal would give her a directional cue.
But Earhart reported she was unable to determine their direction. She lacked the necessary equipment and the training to interpret that signal.
And then the final terrifying transmission, which is perhaps the most important technical detail of the whole flight.
It is. She broadcast her last intelligible message. She reported flying along a calculated north to south line of position 157,337 degrees that Noonan would have pre-calculated to pass directly through Howland Island.
So she knew she was somewhere on that specific navigational line.
But she did not know if she was north of the island, requiring a southward flight, or south of the island, requiring northward flight. She was reduced to flying a search pattern over a vast ocean, running low on fuel right in the target area.
So if we synthesize this, the loss of control was due to a stack of compounding factors, not a single error.
Exactly. It was a technical and human compromise. First, you have the timing misunderstanding. Itasca and Earhart were using time systems set a half-hour apart. Earhart used Greenwich Civil Time. Itasca used naval time.
A half-hour error in a 20-hour flight is catastrophic.
For calculating position and fuel reserves, absolutely.
Then there was the issue of pilot unfamiliarity with the new aircraft systems.
Critically, the Electros Bendix direction finding system had been installed just before the flight, and Earhart was simply unfamiliar with it. Worse, the card showing the critical antenna band settings was mounted out of her sight. Even when she could hear the Itasca's 7,500 kilohertz signal, she failed to determine a minimum.
Okay, for the learner, can we clarify what determining a minimum bearing means in this context?
Absolutely. In older radio direction finding systems, you don't look for the loudest signal. You actually rotate the antenna until the signal completely fades away to a null or a minimum,
That point of silence tells you the antenna is pointing directly at the source.
giving you the precise line to follow. Earhart failing to find that null meant the clear signals she received were essentially useless for navigation.
And you have to add to that the fact that the Electra's RDF had already failed due to a blown fuse on an earlier leg. Even though it was replaced, it suggests a lack of confidence in the systems she was relying on.
So you have this confluence of compromises: timing error, equipment failure, a key operator in Manning is gone, a lack of familiarity with critical new systems, and the strategic removal of safety gear due to weight concerns.
It's just a recipe for disaster.
Retired USN Captain Lawrence Safford, who meticulously analyzed all the radio documents, he concluded bluntly that the flight suffered from poor planning and worse execution.
And the search that followed was just unprecedented for the
It
time.
was historically monumental. The official search by the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard lasted for 17 days, costing $4 million. To put that in perspective for you, that's $87 million in today's money.
A budget almost certainly higher than the entire cost of the Electra 10E and the entire circumnavigation attempt combined.
It was the costliest and most intensive search in U.S. history up to that time, and yet no wreckage was found.
And her husband, George Putnam, he moved quickly to manage the financial aftermath.
Putnam financed several private searches. Eventually, to manage the accumulating debt and settle her affairs, he successfully sought to waive the standard 7-year waiting period. Amelia Earhart was legally declared dead in absentia on January 5, 1939.
The official conclusion, fuel exhaustion, crash, and rest at 17,000 feet, is the most logical, but the missing aircraft is what allows all these theories to thrive. The comparison made by the National Air and Space Museum's senior curator, Tom D. Crouch, that the Electra's whereabouts are as archaeologically significant as the Titanic. That tells you everything about the public obsession.
And that obsession has driven countless expensive and elaborate expeditions chasing various scenarios. The Gardner Island hypothesis, which now refers to Nikomaro Atoll, remains the most persistent alternative theory.
And that hypothesis suggests they simply missed Howland, flew south, and managed a desperate crash landing on that remote coral atoll, surviving temporarily as castaways.
Precisely. Expeditions have explored the seventh site on Nikomaro for decades. They found various artifacts, including potential traces of fire, bones, aluminum fragments.
But nothing definitive.
Despite intense effort, no definitive, undisputed physical link, no confirmed human remains, and no wreckage conclusively identified as the Lockheed Electra 10E has ever been found to prove the theory.
On the other end of the speculation spectrum, you have the dramatic Japanese capture theory.
This one assumes they successfully reached or were shot down near the Japanese South Seas Mandate and captured by Japanese forces. This narrative is typically fueled by vague or unnamed witnesses, including Saipan natives and alleged Japanese troops.
But it lacks any verifiable documentation or physical evidence from the period.
None whatsoever. Other, less popular theories, such as returning to Rabaul, New Britain, have also failed to yield results despite focused searches.
And we can't overlook the occasional outright hoaxes that confuse the historical record.
The Irene Bolam hoax is a perfect example of the danger of speculation. A 1970 book claimed Earhart survived, changed her name, and remarried as Irene Craigmile Bolam. Bolam sued the publisher, McGraw-Hill, for $1.5 million, that's $12 million today, and the book was withdrawn with an out-of-court settlement.
The public's desire for a definitive answer is so strong that it constantly creates these expensive, misleading narratives.
It does, and the searches continue today, often employing staggering amounts of modern technology.
The commitment is relentless.
Deep-sea sonar searches have been ongoing for decades, often concentrated on that final line of position Earhart broadcast. David Jordan led expeditions in 2003 and 2006, spending $4.5 million. Robert Ballard, famous for finding the Titanic, searched near Nikomaro in 2019 and found nothing conclusive.
And most recently, in 2024, Tony Romeo financed a highly publicized deep-sea search near Howland Island.
These searches just highlight the continuing public and private financial obsession with solving this mystery.
But despite the elusive wreckage, her influence is certainly not missing. Her legacy is monumental.
Oh, she remains a monumental global cultural icon. She's cited as a feminist pioneer and a motivational figure. Hillary Clinton emphasized that Earhart's legacy resonates for anyone who dreams of the stars.
And her accomplishments weren't abstract. They had a concrete impact.
They directly inspired the more than 1,000 female pilots who served as women Air Force service pilots, the WASP, during World War II.
And the tributes, they range from the large and public to the incredibly specific.
They do. Her birthplace in Kansas is a museum. Purdue University, which funded her last plane, has Earhart Hall and the new Amelia Earhart Terminal. There's the Earhart Light on Howland Island, a navigational day beacon that perpetually signals her missing presence.
We see her in cultural touchstones like Joni Mitchell's song Amelia.
And the album The Last Flight by Public Service Broadcasting, which is dedicated to her final journey.
And then there's the crucial forensic piece, the one artifact that links the failure of the first attempt to the mystery of the second.
This is the control piece. It's a small section of the Lockheed Electra's starboard engine nacelle, which was recovered after that March 1937 ground loop crash in Hawaii. This authenticated piece of metal is carefully preserved precisely because it is the only confirmed physical marker.
So it will be the forensic tool necessary to authenticate any potential wreckage found in the deep Pacific.
Whenever, or if ever, the Electra 10E is definitively located, it's the key to the solution.
So we've traced her remarkable journey. From the exhilarated kid on the shed roof in Atchison, battling chronic illness and financial hardship, to the globally recognized, record-shattering aviator and determined advocate for women in a male-dominated field.
What defines her career is the sheer, persistent focus on taking the hardest route. The solo Atlantic, the equatorial circumnavigation, not just for glory, but to prove technical viability and capability. She achieved immense public visibility by mastering the technical challenges and, well, by painstakingly managing her public image with the help of Putnam.
And the synthesis of her life in her final flight presents that heartbreaking irony we've been talking about.
It does. Amelia Earhart built her entire personal and professional structure around the concept of dual control, fiercely guarding her independence and ensuring she had contractual authority over her aircraft and her personal decisions.
Which is so evident in that remarkable wedding day letter to Putnam.
Exactly. Yet her final, most ambitious mission was ultimately undone by an uncontrollable cascade of failures. Equipment she didn't fully master, compromised communications, key personnel walking away, and most crucially, the decision to sacrifice essential safety features. A loss of control, stemming from a series of compromises.
And that's the point we must leave with you, the learner. It's the tension between the icon of autonomy and the reality of external constraints.
We know from the sources that George P. Putnam pressed Earhart to remove critical safety and navigational equipment items that could have saved them, to lighten the Electra for the final flight.
So if she dedicated her life to autonomy, what was the price of that compromise?
Considering her clear, articulated belief in maintaining dual control over her own life and career, how might Amelia Earhart have judged the subtle but potentially catastrophic external pressures, be they public expectation, the urgency of funding, or the persuasive managerial influence of her own husband that compromised the integrity and safety of her final critical mission?
It's a powerful, timeless lesson in how even the most determined individuals can have their technical work undermined by the pressures of celebrity and external influence.
A heavy thought, for sure.
A heavy but absolutely vital thought that adds tremendous depth to the legend of Amelia Earhart. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.